Everything you need to know about products and services that can improve your life. This is Experts on Call on CL 650.
Here comes the rain again, falling on my head like a memory, falling on my head like a new emotion. I want to walk in the open.
Welcome back to Key Pacific's Talk About Strata on CIL 650. I'm Tony Giaventu, your host. We have Albert Atfield from CanStar Restorations and Sean Lang from Specifex Building Science, and we've been talking about the damages with the storms. I think every station plays that song every time it starts raining, don't you think? Every drive show, everything you hear, "Here Comes the Rain Again," but it's a good song. And we're just about to get into that season. So preparation. I think we've got a little window now probably of a couple weeks for stratas, for property owners, multifamily buildings, single-family buildings. Start from the outside, Sean.
Well,
preparation, what can they do?
It's important for people to take a weekend day and, especially if the weather's nice, walk around your building. And you can start from the ground and look at the walls, look at the windows, look at the doors, look at the siding, look at all the building elements and look for any issues that are going to catch your eye. And it's very easy to do, and it's surprising how you can look at the linear siding on a building and all of a sudden something seems out of whack. That's probably catching your eye for a reason. So you should be looking at those key areas in particular. Look at sealants. Then as you move up the building to the gutters, if you have a sloped roof system with exterior gutters, you want to get those gutters cleaned and the drain pipes cleaned from those gutters too. So it's not just the gutter themselves. And if you're comfortable getting on a ladder and doing it yourself, have at her. It's not a bad way to save a couple bucks. But if you're not comfortable with ladders and you're certainly not comfortable being on a roof and not well versed in the safety and risk elements of all that, hire a proper professional to do the work. But that's what you should be doing, is basically going from the ground up on the building.
Well, if you live in a strata, the whole reason you live in a strata for the first place is so I don't have to cut the drafts, I don't have to do my drains, right? Like we collectively get the benefit of being able to hire people to do these things.
And hiring the right professional for the job, ones with experience and the right training to deal with those issues is very key. So, easy things like clearing drains. Look for loose vents on a sloped roof. On a big strata, there can be 30 to 50 vents sometimes. Look for the loose ones. Look for buckling shingles. If it's an older organic shingle that might be buckling, those get caught by wind quite easily. Look for loose flashings around chimneys. Quite often you have the grouted in wing flashings that can be waving around in the wind. And as they wave around in the wind, they actually do wear, but they also expose underlying step flashings, which could let water in. So you want to look for all those different elements. Like again, on a big strata building, you don't want to be the one doing it. You want to hire a professional to do that review. And that professional could be a company like ours, or it could be a roofing contractor. It doesn't matter. Somebody who's trained to go up on the building and knows what they're looking for. You can go up on a roof system, and if you don't know exactly what you're looking for, you may not find an issue. You may walk right over it, and that's not going to be any good to you.
Right. What about torch-on membranes?
Torch-on membranes, SBS, which is the acronym for them, they're a very strong and tough membrane system. What you have to look for on those are buckling issues, which could be caused by deflections in the decking or in the insulation layer or in the actual membrane itself. You're looking for blistering, so puffy areas as you're walking around on it. Is there something that just feels soft, and you might hear components of the system that are actually separating and causing a clicking sound as you're walking around. You're looking for granule loss. Granule loss can happen. The torch-on systems are covered with a fine granule that's embedded into it. It acts as a UV protection and also an impact protection. So if that granule has been displaced and you're seeing more black, the underlying bitumen of the roof membrane, that isn't in itself an emergency. But what happens is that the sun can now leach out the components of that membrane and cause it to deteriorate quicker. So those areas you want to get covered over with a new layer of cap sheet. But drains and scuppers in particular. If you notice a plugged drain or a plugged scupper, why was it plugged? Is it plugged because there's trees nearby? We'll trim them. Is it plugged because the drain strainer isn't big enough or isn't in place or isn't secured well enough? I've seen overflow scuppers that have no strainer at all, yet they get plugged. So somebody goes and puts a light bulb strainer in there, and we've all seen those. They look like a badminton ball, bird or whatever. Those will get clogged very quickly too. So you need to put an oversized strainer that's much bigger than the scupper. It has more net area to let water through. so that the debris can gather around that much larger strainer, but more water can get through and actually reach the scupper.
So lots of preparation stuff, and then of course have routine inspection during the storm season.
Yeah.
Right after
Yeah.
every plan to have
Before, during, and after sometimes,
a
depending on the
designated
building.
contractor person, consultant,
Yeah.
someone in the strata, someone that's been organized through the manager, someone who is going to be able to inspect the basic performance of the roofing and exterior system after every storm.
And if you develop a relationship with a company to do that, it can be done on an hourly basis, even on a per call basis.
Right.
So when you have a big event and you're concerned, you call them up, they can come out and do a quick check over. It doesn't have to be that onerous or expensive, depending on the building. Obviously, if it's a really steep pitched roof and it's large, there's risk factors which drive costs up. But if it's a fairly easy building to access, it shouldn't take much cost to get it looked at properly, repeatedly, during the bad season.
It's interesting when you drive around the Lower Mainland, you see a lot of buildings that will have a chronic wet spot on the outside of the building, or a spot where there's a lot of mold and algae buildup and there's staining on the building. Building exteriors are designed to deflect, but they're not designed for waterfalls of water running down them.
No. And that can be part of the roof design failure too. A lot of times you'll see flashings on parapets that are sloped the wrong way.
Right.
And if it's a wide enough parapet, it'll actually gather quite a bit of water, which then pools and flows over, and you end up with an algae stain running down the exterior of the building.
Right.
And depending on the type of siding component, it's not necessarily bad. It's aesthetically bad, but it's just,
Right.
Right.
So
And then there's the wind-driven side of a building. If it happens to be prevailing and always gets hit by the rain and the wind, those sides are going to be more at risk than the other sides that don't receive that, or backed up by another building that doesn't receive the wind. So each individual building is going to be susceptible on different aspects based on its locale and the other buildings that are around it.
So plan
Plan
inspect.
and know your building.
Plan, inspect, know your building.
Yeah.
Albert, on the inside, let's talk about planning now. What can we do proactively?
Well, on the inside, firstly and foremost, I think we always want to prepare for 72 hours without any type of assistance. So that would be taking care of yourself. So water supplies, flashlights, et cetera, et cetera. One of the things that I always emphasize is that all your hoses and whatnot should be checked periodically. I would always recommend about every 3 months you go around and check all your supply lines, make sure they're not dripping or have any kind of compromised areas in them. And if you have the ability, change them to a steel braided supply line. Ultimately,
things
that's
like
the best way to go.
your washing machine lines. Yeah.
So you want to always be inspecting those, making sure your drains are all attached on your washing machines and fastened so that they can't get free. And basically that's it. I mean, hot water tanks, if you have them in your unit, they should be, more than likely, I think most hot water tanks are probably about an 8-year life. A lot of people like to think that they're a much longer lifespan than that, but ultimately I think you should probably be considering exchanging them around 8 years. So there's different things that you want to look at that will help to keep down those possibilities of issues.
Again, a lot of that depends on the kind of building too, though, right?
Yes, by all means.
we may be townhouses where each person is ultimately on their own for their own unit. Even though they're a collective system, they're ultimately on their own as they survive in their own unit. But if we're in a high-rise building, everything that we do in one unit interacts with other units, and so
100%. Yes.
Having access floor to floor. I think flashlight. The number of people who actually talked about hallways being dark and not being able to get around was appalling. The number of people who don't have flashlights ready at their doorway to be able to get around their buildings was really quite surprising to me. Water. That's, we're lucky because our GVRD water system didn't go down, because you could still turn a tap on and you could still get a glass of water. And in buildings that were gas fired for hot water, people could still have hot showers. So there were some benefits to that. But what happens when that system shuts down? Right? We have some other catastrophic problem.
Right.
How much water does everybody need per person on a daily basis to make it through 72 hours? And in some cases, some buildings were as much as 4 or 5 days without power. So,
Right.
so 72 hours isn't even long enough. On a radio. right? Your a battery-operated radio or a crank radio with a generator in it, something that you can get some basic safety or life information or weather information about what's taking place, evacuation information. That was another problem that people were saying, well, we couldn't get onto the website. BC Hydro website crashed because of demand. Not surprising. People could still use mobile phones until, of course, their phones no longer were charged, and then they were losing their source of access as well. But local radio is still one of the best ways of staying in touch with what's going on with the system. So, other thoughts, preparation thoughts, getting ready?
Well, I think we've pretty much covered most of them. It's basically just being aware of your building is the biggest point I can make, and trying to be one step ahead of the risk. Realizing that from our aspect outside of the building, a lot of those components you won't be able to access during an event, and if they're not prepared, you can't touch them until well after the event to deal with that issue for safety reasons.
Well, Albert, Sean, thanks so much for coming on the show, and hopefully I'm not going to have to see you in our neighborhood dealing with the disaster soon on the horizon. So you're listening to CIL 650 Strata Life. I'm Tony Giavento, your host. We'll be right back after these messages.
This is Experts on Call on CIL 650.